Good evening, and welcome to tonight's edition of the French and Indian War, the end of salutary neglect and the causes of the American Revolution. Now, in today's video, I'm going to be talking about, well, it's not one video, it's actually three videos because of the software that I'm using. But in part one of the video today, I'm going to talk about the French and Indian War for a couple of minutes, talk about the end of salutary neglect for a couple of minutes, and then also talk about the causes of the American Revolution. That will be a much more significant deal probably in the second and third installment of today's video presentation. So I want to talk about the ways that in North America, the ways that the British and the French were constantly conflicting with each other. This is just a quick overview. Remember, we talked about the fact that both countries were using mercantilism. Both countries were trying to expand their colonial claims in order to increase their wealth. Britain and France had fought three different wars from 1690 to 1750. But all three of those wars started in Europe and spread to the colonies, and they would be fought by colonists. But what made the French and Indian War unique is that it started in the Americas and then spread to Europe. And in fact, some historians even talk about the fact that the French and Indian War was really the world's first world war, because this war would spread into India, this war would spread into Africa, the British and the French would fight in Asia, they would fight in Latin America, they would fight in North America, in Europe, so they were fighting everywhere. So in the conflict here between the French and the British, this conflict spread rapidly. And of course, as our map talks about, during the 1700s, their colonies had grown together. And of course, as we know, the British would eventually win the war. The French had a lot of success early. The British would eventually win and dominate their influence. Well, almost immediately after the war, there was a rebellion by a chief by the name of Pontiac, and he is from up here in Ottawa, in the Detroit region, thus the idea of the Pontiac being a car named after Chief Pontiac, who organized this coalition of Indians to go around attacking British settlements as people were moving westward, because people were expanding to the west, and they were expanding to the west, and they were expanding to the west. So Pontiac waged this little war where he started to attack people, and he started to attack, and he started to attack, and this war got really, really bloody. Now understand, when we say really bloody, a few dozen people were killed in various raids. It wasn't thousands, but it was hundreds, and it was enough to really strike fear in the hearts of colonists. So as these colonists had moved west, they keep getting attacked by Indians, and of course, who do they call for protection but their own government, who had come to protect them before, the British government. Well, the British government comes over to protect them, and they send over thousands of troops to put down this little Indian rebellion, and they use their organizational superiority, their military superiority, to put down this rebellion and take control of the Great Lakes region, this area right up here from along Lake Erie, basically northern Ohio, northern Indiana, and southern Michigan, this area right here. So their influence is certainly going to be significant over a very large area. It was very expensive for them to control this. So the British decide, in a rather unique idea, what we call the Proclamation of 1763. The British decide that this is just way too expensive to keep having the colonists move west. Then the British have to send the army. Then they have to attack all these Indians and fight these wars and do these things. So the British made what they call the Proclamation of 1763 that said that no colonists shall cross the Appalachian Mountains. The Appalachian Mountains were basically a line that spread down the western coast of the United States. I'm going to go back a couple of slides here. Right here where this yellow or orange line, that's the Appalachian Mountain Range. So the British said no colonists shall travel west of that line. Obviously, the colonists are not very happy about that, because as more and more colonists had moved over here over the years, they were running out of space east of the Appalachian Mountains. And like we saw in our video clips with the French and Indian War, with the Last of the Mohicans movie, people were starting to get frustrated with this lack of freedom. They wanted more land. They needed more space. They wanted to be farmers. They wanted to be self-sufficient. They had come over as indentured servants, and now they wanted their freedom. Well, the colonists really didn't like the fact that the British were making this what seemed to them a totally arbitrary line. Arbitrary means that they just randomly decided this decision. So the colonists were very upset by this decision, and they were unhappy because this is a decision that was made in England, not a decision made in the Americas by the colonial assemblies, who had gained a lot of influence over the course of the last 50 to 100 years because the British had pretty much ignored the colonies over the last 50 to 100 years because of the principle of salutary neglect. So as a result of the French and Indian War, the policy of salutary neglect basically comes to an end. The British stop allowing the colonists to make their own decision. They stop allowing the colonists to do their own thing, and they start to have a lot more say over what's going on, because what the British are realizing is that they've allowed the colonies to be so free and independent that the colonies actually think that they are free and independent. And so they're going to start cracking down. I like to compare this a lot to your parents and you right now, because as teenagers, you are relatively independent. But your parents have to remind you from time to time how independent you really are, which is not that independent. So there's this constant give and take. And this is kind of that relationship between the British government and the colonial assemblies, or the colonists living in the New World. So they're constantly struggling with this idea of how they're going to do it. And so what happens is the British start governing more strictly. They start passing laws, and the colonists fight back. They resist. And this is really what sets the stage for the American Revolution. And this is how the French and Indian War, Pontiac's Rebellion, the Proclamation of 1763, and the American Revolution all come into play, is that they just kind of work from one to the other to the other. And what we're going to spend time on in our next video presentation is this idea of cause and effect. That there's going to be a cause that is going to be caused by something the British do or something the colonists do. And for everything that there is a cause, there is an effect. If I drop my pencil, it's going to hit the floor. If I throw a $100 bill on the ground, someone's going to pick it up and use that $100 bill just for something fun. So there's a cause-effect relationship that really kind of builds over the course of 10, 15, 20 years here, from the French and Indian War in 1754 until the American Declaration of Independence in 1776.